Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to the HR Blueprint, a special podcast series recorded live from the 2025 Strategic Human Resource Management Conference in Beijing, China. I'm your host, Lawrence Hooper. The 21st century has transformed the very fabric of our organizations. To navigate the demands and complexities of the modern workplace, companies, both large and small, have had to become fundamentally technology-driven. At the heart of this transformation is a function that's evolving faster than perhaps any other: human resource planning. But what is human resource planning in this new era? As defined by Farhad Shah in 2018, it's the critical process of forecasting an organization's future human resource needs and designing strategies to meet them. It's no longer about just filling seats. It's a strategic linchpin that allows companies to maintain their competitive edge and adapt a relentless external change. It requires a deep understanding of the demographics, technological, and regulatory landscape to ensure the right people with the right skills are in the right place at the right time. Our fast-paced environment demands a radical shift. We must move from the traditional reactive application of human resource planning to a new model that is focused on staffing and administration that is predictive, strategic, and socially responsible. In this special episode this evening, we will identify and explain the major issues confronting human resource planning today, and we'll explore how these contemporary forces are completely reshaping all aspects of human resource management. Ladies and gentlemen, to guide us through this complex terrain, I am thrilled to be joined by four experts who are at the forefront of this revolution. I will introduce them. First, we have Evelyn Blake, our Director of People Analytics. Evelyn is a thoughtful leader on human-AI partnership, and she will break down how we can use predictive analytics to complement human-centered design, moving from hindsight to foresight. Secondly, we have Josiane Pompey, our Future of Work lead. Josiane has been instrumental in helping global organizations navigate the seismic shift to remote and hybrid work models, and will outline the strategic frameworks needed to build a cohesive and productive distributed workforce. Our third expert on the panel this evening is Kristen Taylor, a renowned Chief Wellbeing Officer. Kristen champions the concept that employee well-being is not a perk, but the core engine of an inspired and resilient workforce, and will share how to move beyond superficial perks to architect systemic health. And our final panelist this evening is Victoria Dixon, our Head of Diversity and Inclusion. Victoria will help us unpack the profound impact of major demographic shifts from the quote-unquote silver tsunami to the rise of Gen Z, and explain how to build genuinely inclusive cultures that turn diversity into a sustainable competitive advantage. Ladies and gentlemen, in the 21st century, several critical issues have been identified that are redefining human resource planning. Over this conversation, we will dive deep into four of them: the human-AI partnership, the realities of remote and hybrid work, the strategic imperative of employee well-being, and the powerful convergence of demographic shifts and diversity. So let's begin our blueprint for the future. Elovine, let's start with you. In an era of AI, many in HR are anxious about being replaced. How should we really be viewing this technology?
Thank you for having me, Lawrence. Well, that is certainly the buzzword these days, isn't it? That AI is going to replace us. But what I would want to share today is that the story should be about partnership, not replacement. Now, AI gives us predictive power or foresight into things like attrition or skills gaps. Predictive analytics is really predictive workforce analytics, and it's more than just reporting data. To quote Zafar et al. In 2021, it's a holistic way to predict the quantitative performance of HR projects to strategically enhance future workforce planning decisions. So essentially, predictive analytics tells us what is happening. On the other hand, while the data gathered with predictive analytics is crucial for businesses, we should not forget to include things like ethics and human intervention. Again, the researchers Zafar et al. Addressed this issue in their 2021 paper when they stated that design thinking should be used because of its human-centered, iterative approach to managing issues. Essentially, this human element provides the why, turning data points into compassionate, effective actions. It is ultimately this synergy that will transform HR into data-informed coaches who can truly motivate and develop employees.
Elovine, that's a very comprehensive response. Here is another question. Can you give us a concrete example of this partnership in action?
Oh, of course, certainly. Now, let's look at the work of the researchers Pillai and Shivatanu in 2023. They tell us that by using AI and predictive analytics specifically, companies can now predict manpower costs, including the cost of hiring each person and the rate of employee turnover. All of this data can then be used to create financial models. Predictive analytics also helps to predict how many employees will be needed, how well they would do on the job, and how to build a talent pool for succession planning. Now let's look at this case in point to illustrate the partnership between AI and the human element. In particular, let's look at turnover, one of the most central functions of HR planning. Now, instead of reviewing quarterly reports on the rate of employee turnover, AI can flag at-risk teams months in advance. This flagging, though, should not be used as an automated termination list, but rather as an intervention trigger. The goal here should be to allow a manager to have a career development conversation and hopefully retain valuable talent. That's the partnership we're talking about. The data informs the conversation and the human connection drives the solution. Now, this new way of thinking changes the job of HR professionals in a monumental way. We must emphasize that the modern HR planner is no longer just someone who is going to process transactions, but is now a strategic data-driven coach for the entire organization. Moreover, full integration of AI and HRP is still an evolving story, and we must start with dedicated strategies and culture transformations. Companies can do this by creating a system for AI ethics by design, and this system must, of course, include things like strict rules for data governance and full transparency. We can look at Zafar et al. In 23 again, who provides support by highlighting that this transformation requires significant investment in the HR team, started with an AI augmentation upskilling program that would combine data literacy with a design thinking attitude. And this will ultimately equip professionals with human-centered and empathetic skills. Now let's put this all together. And I'll quote Venugopal, who in 2023 stated that full HR transformation should facilitate a more inclusive approach, and it should be guided by strategic organizational development interventions, such as team building, role redefinition, and the adoption of change management plans. Now we're going to conclude, and we must emphasize that the future of HR planning in the 21st century depends significantly on human and artificial intelligence truly integrating in a complementary way.
Elovine, thanks for your well-informed response. That's indeed a powerful model. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's now turn our attention to the future of lead work, Josiane Pompey. Josiane.
Yes.
Let's apply the strategic thinking to where work actually happens. How has this changed our planning today?
Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you for having me. So, when people talk about remote and hybrid work, they often call it a trend. But honestly, that word doesn't do it justice. What we're really looking at is a fundamental reorganization of how work gets done. Think about it. For decades, our systems were built around an office. And now we're trying to fit 21st century realities into those 20th century blueprints. So Colleague 2022 actually called this out as a strategic failure to modernize HR planning. We can't keep using office-based structures to manage a workforce that's spread across time zones, devices, and even lifestyles. And that's where the big problem comes in, what's known as proximity bias. It's that subtle tendency to value people we see in person more than those working remotely. When leaders rely on presence instead of performance, remote employees tend to get left behind. There are fewer promotions, fewer opportunities, and eventually higher turnover. That fractures your talent pipeline and chips away at culture as reported by Hack 2023. So you see, this isn't about convenience. It's about fairness and strategy. Thank you.
Just to follow up, Josiane, I see the stakes are very high. What's the business case for getting this right?
Exactly. The stakes couldn't be higher. The thing is, the talent landscape has been globalized. Flexibility is no longer a perk, but a core expectation. And our HRP must reflect that to attract and retain top talent. The data proves it. According to a study conducted by Crawford in 2024, companies that have a clear strategic hybrid model see a 33% drop in turnover and an 8% rise in performance. That's not a small bump. That's a full transformation in how organizations retain and motivate talent. You see, the key here is that flexibility is no longer a perk. It's a core expectation. Our HR planning systems have to reflect that if we want to attract and keep top talent in a globalized market. However, navigating this shift comes with its own challenges, and they're not small ones. First, we have the managerial mindset. We have got to move leaders away from that old supervisor mentality and help them become outcome-driven coaches. These are people who manage results, not attendance. Second, there is the structural infrastructure. This is a secure, equitable digital workspace, which isn't a luxury anymore. It's an operational must-have. It's part of how we build trust and fairness in a virtual environment. And third, what I like to call the compliance labyrinth. Managing global and hybrid teams means dealing with a patchwork of labor laws, data policies, and tax frameworks. It's complex, but it's now a core reality of modern HR planning. So, to make sense of all of this, I always go back to what I like to call the hybrid work blueprint. It rests on 3 pillars. First, develop a strategic work location policy. Now, this is the foundation. It creates clarity, consistency, and fairness across the organization. Second, we need to invest in outcome-focused leadership development. HRP must actively budget for upskilling managers to manage bias, set digital goals, and build trust across distances. And finally, re-engineer performance management for agility. We have got to replace attendance tracking with systems like OKRs. These are objectives and key results that measure real impact, not hours logged. So when you think about it, hybrid work isn't about where people sit anymore. It's about how we lead, how we measure success, and how we design fairness into the very structure of work. That's how we build a resilient, inspired workforce that fits for the modern economy. I thank you.
Josie, and I want to thank you too, because that was a very well-informed and organized response to the question. Ladies and gentlemen, let's move to our third panelist here this evening. And she is the Chief Wellbeing Officer, Christian. Christian, this new way of working puts a huge spotlight on the individual. How does this connect to your domain?
Thank you for having me, Lawrence. What we must realize is that an inspired workforce is a healthy workforce. Employee well-being is the engine that drives any organization to success. When employees are burnt out, their ability to contribute meaningfully plummets. Now, this isn't any soft stuff. It is a hard strategic priority. Burnout is no doubt one of the biggest, most expensive drivers of turnover that we face. Arianti et al. 2020 research supports this by emphasizing that in the modern workplace, companies are responsible for ensuring the health and well-being of their workforce, in addition to headcount and skill development.
So, Christian, many companies offer yoga and meditation apps. Is that sufficient?
Oh, definitely not. Not even close. This is what we like to call commoditized well-being. Now let's face it, a yoga app does nothing to fix a toxic manager or an impossible workload. We must engineer well-being into our operating system. The first step is to view well-being as a strategic investment. Senior leaders should assign resources, set an example of healthy behavior, and hold managers responsible for the welfare of their teams. Secondly, rather than focusing solely on individual wellness initiatives, organizational level interventions like workload redesign, more transparent role expectations, and even equitable scheduling should be given precedence. Elufio et al. 2024 asserts that this systematic approach is far more successful in enhancing mental health. And thirdly, companies should make sure that all workers, including contract, shift, and remote workers, can participate in and access well-being programs. Offering digital counseling services, hybrid workshops, and even flexible participation options are definitely ways to achieve this. Thank you.
Well, that's a very comprehensive response. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move to our fourth and final panelist here this evening. Victoria, a systemic approach is key, and that system must be built for everyone. Let us know how this final pillar works in HR.
Thank you so much for having me, Lawrence. You know what? We are really living through this fascinating moment right now. There's so much happening all at once. We've got an aging workforce, what some are calling the silver tsunami, where a huge amount of knowledge is walking right out the front door. At the same time, younger generations are coming in with a total different expectations. They want purpose, flexibility, and a sense in meaning in their work. And all of this is playing out in a truly global talent market. So yeah, like my colleague mentioned, those old one-size-fit-all HR models, they just don't work anymore.
Victor, can you explain to us what is the core implication of HR planning in this new context?
Of course, these implications here are huge. It's not just about filling job descriptions anymore. It's about building a living, breathing talent ecosystem. That means thinking differently about things like phased retirement so we can actually capture that hard-earned knowledge before it walks out the door. It means creating an employee experience that's rooted in purpose and growth. And it means shifting our focus from credentials to skills so we can really tap into the full range of talent that's out there.
And what about fostering a culture where diverse ecosystems can truly thrive? Give us your response on that.
You know, that's a good point. So it brings me to this phrase that I love. Diversity is a fact, inclusion is the act. It really sums up what organizations are facing right now. To truly succeed, there are three things we need to focus on. First, we've got to embrace data-driven agile HR planning. Remison and Ulrich 2015 talk about using people analytics to forecast skill gaps and actually measuring inclusion. And that such is a game changer when it comes to making smarter workforce decisions. Secondly, it's all about leadership. Burke and Titus 2020 emphasize the importance of inclusive leadership. This is training managers to build psychological safety and lead diverse teams effectively. It's not enough to say we value inclusion, we have to hold leaders accountable for it. And finally, lifelong learning has to become part of the culture. The World Economic Forum 2023 highlights how critical upskilling is, especially as AI transforms the way we work. If we are not preparing people for AI augmented roles, we are already behind. So basically, at the end of the day, all these demographic and social shifts represent a real inflection point. But if organizations lean into data, agility, and deep inclusion, they can turn these challenges into competitive advantages, creating a workforce that's not just diverse, but truly inspired.
Thank you very much, Victoria.
You're welcome,
We
Lauren.
have covered 4 complex pillars here this evening. Let's bring it all together at this time. So I'm now asking for a final thought from each of our panelists here this evening. Evelyn, what is your one takeaway?
Of course, of course. So I would say in the 21st century, we must embrace AI as a partner and learn to use its foresight to empower human empathy and action.
And Josiane?
Well, for me, it will be architect for distribution. We need to build policies and leaders for the hybrid era because flexibility is now non-negotiable. So that's it for me.
Kristen, how about you?
If we don't remember anything else from this discussion, remember this. We must engineer for well-being. Make it a systemic priority, not a perk, to fuel a resilient and inspired organization.
And last but not least, Victoria?
Cultivation inclusion, what else could it be? It's the glue that binds a diverse talent ecosystem into cohesive, a high-performing whole.
So ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. The blueprint for the 21st century. Foresight, flexibility, well-being, and inclusion. Thank you for joining us here this evening. Thank you to our brilliant panelists. Thank you all for your attention. Goodbye.